They told her she wasn't the right fit, but they never expected her to fight back. A top airline, a hidden system of discrimination, and one flight attendant who refused to be silenced. When she exposed the truth, they tried to erase her. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. Stay with us because this story is about to take off. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Naomi Caldwell adjusted the neatly pressed collar of her uniform as she stepped into the bustling terminal of O'Hare International Airport. The rhythmic hum of rolling suitcases, the overhead flight announcements, the distant chatter of travelers, it was all so familiar, yet today it felt heavier. She had been a flight attendant for nearly 7 years, dedicating herself to Stratosphere Airlines with everything she had. The long hours, the delayed flights, the high-maintenance passengers, none of it had ever deterred her. She loved the sky, the thrill of takeoff, the quiet peace of a midnight descent. But more than anything, she had always dreamed of moving up, of one day becoming a lead flight attendant. That was the goal. Yet that door never seemed to open for her. Naomi knew the routine by heart. Every few months, management would announce an opening for lead flight attendant positions. Applications were submitted, performance records were reviewed, and then quietly a decision was made. Every time she applied, she was met with a polite rejection. She wasn't the only one who had noticed. "You know how it is," an older colleague had once whispered to her over coffee in the break room. "They don't come right out and say it, but if you don't fit the look, you're not getting the job." At the time, Naomi had brushed it off, convincing herself that maybe she just wasn't ready yet. But as the years passed and as she watched other, less experienced attendants get promoted, attendants who all had one thing in common, her confidence began to waver. Today, she was scheduled for a high-profile flight from New York to Los Angeles. First-class passengers only, the elite clientele Stratosphere prided itself on catering to. It was supposed to be a privilege to work these flights, but Naomi had long since learned what that really meant. Flawless service, perfect smiles, and the unspoken expectation that she would remain in the background. She took a slow breath as she walked through the employee entrance, nodding at a few coworkers along the way. "Morning, Naomi," a familiar voice called. She turned to see Riley Vaughn, one of the few people at the airline she actually trusted. Riley was a couple of years younger, a friendly face in a job that often felt isolating. "You hear anything yet?" Riley asked, adjusting the strap of her carry-on bag. Naomi knew exactly what she was referring to, the promotion announcement. It was supposed to happen today. "No," Naomi admitted, forcing a small smile. "I guess we'll see." Riley hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I heard Charlotte Kensington's name come up. Just a rumor, but—" Naomi felt her stomach tighten. Charlotte. Of course. Charlotte Kensington had only been with the airline for 3 years. She was charming, effortlessly graceful, and had a way of making people believe she was born for this job. But most importantly, she fit the image the company wanted to project. Blonde, blue-eyed, and every bit the classic first-class attendant. Naomi swallowed the frustration rising in her chest. She had told herself she wouldn't expect anything. It was easier that way. Just then, a group of first-class passengers began making their way toward the boarding area, their designer luggage gliding smoothly across the polished floor. As Naomi stepped forward to greet them, she noticed something that had become almost routine. The way their eyes skimmed over her, barely registering her presence, before settling on the flight attendants they considered more approachable. It was subtle, never outright disrespectful, but it was there. The preference, the silent dismissal. She straightened her posture and put on her professional smile. It was just another day, but deep down, something in her was growing restless. Something told her that today, things were about to change. The break room was quieter than usual, an odd contrast to the usual pre-flight buzz. Naomi sat at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, though she had barely taken a sip. She had spent the entire morning forcing herself to stay focused, completing pre-flight checks, smiling at passengers, exchanging polite greetings. It was all second nature by now. But underneath it all, there was a tension she couldn't shake. She glanced at the clock. The announcement should be happening any moment now. The door to the break room opened, and in walked Dennis Holloway, their station manager. Behind him, a few supervisors followed, their faces unreadable. Naomi knew the drill. These promotions were never announced with much fanfare. A name would be called, congratulations would be given, and just like that, it would be done. "Good afternoon, everyone," Holloway said, his voice calm and professional. "I won't take up too much of your time. We just wanted to take a moment to congratulate one of our own on their well-earned promotion." Naomi's pulse quickened. This was it. Holloway smiled as he glanced at the clipboard in his hands. "Charlotte Kensington will be stepping into the role of lead flight attendant." The room filled with polite applause. Naomi didn't move. For a split second, she thought maybe she had misheard. Maybe he had said her name, and she just hadn't registered it. But as the reality sank in, a familiar, dull ache settled in her chest. Riley shot her a quick glance, but Naomi barely acknowledged it. Charlotte, sitting at the other end of the room, covered her mouth in feigned surprise. "Oh my God, I can't believe it," she said, laughing softly. "I wasn't expecting this at all." Naomi clenched her jaw. That was a lie. Charlotte knew. She had to. Holloway continued with the formalities, praising Charlotte's dedication and natural leadership. Naomi barely heard any of it. Instead, her mind was replaying the last 7 years. Every shift she had covered, every glowing performance review, every extra effort she had made, thinking it would eventually matter. But in the end, none of it had. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to demand an explanation. But before she could gather the courage to speak, Holloway had already moved on, dismissing the group as if nothing significant had happened. Naomi stood up, her movements stiff. She needed air. As she stepped into the hallway, her phone buzzed. A new email. She opened it. It was an internal document, a list of potential candidates for the lead flight attendant position. Naomi scrolled through the names. Her name wasn't on it. Not now, not ever. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't a simple oversight. She had never even been considered. Her fingers tightened around her phone. For years, she had ignored the voice in the back of her mind, the one that whispered that things weren't fair, that no matter how hard she worked, there were forces at play that she couldn't control. But now the proof was right in front of her, and for the first time, she wasn't going to let it go. Naomi sat alone in the break room, her fingers still clenched around her phone. The list stared back at her, the names neatly typed in corporate formatting, as if they had been decided long before the so-called selection process even began. She exhaled slowly, willing herself to stay composed. The last thing she needed was to let her emotions take over in a place where eyes were always watching. Stratosphere Airlines valued professionalism above all else, and any sign of frustration, especially from someone like her, would only be used against her. The door creaked open and Riley stepped in. "You okay?" she asked cautiously, leaning against the counter. Naomi didn't look up right away. "Charlotte knew," she muttered, still staring at the email. Riley hesitated, then sighed. "I figured." Naomi finally met her gaze. "Then why didn't anyone say anything?" Riley folded her arms, choosing her words carefully. "Look, Naomi, you know how this works." Naomi let out a hollow laugh. "Yeah, I think I finally do." She stood up abruptly, pushing her chair back. "I'm not crazy, right? I mean, I've worked here for 7 years. I've done everything they've asked. More even. And my name was never even an option?" Riley didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the door, as if making sure no one was listening. "I'm not saying it's right," she said finally, "but this company has a certain image they want to keep." Naomi scoffed. "Right, and I don't fit that image." Riley's silence was enough of an answer. Naomi clenched her jaw. She knew Riley wasn't trying to be cruel. If anything, she was just saying out loud what Naomi had already suspected for years. Still, hearing it confirmed like that stung. Before Riley could say anything else, the intercom crackled to life, calling them both for final boarding. Naomi took one last glance at her phone before locking the screen. This conversation wasn't over. The first-class cabin was a world of its own, quiet, luxurious, perfectly curated to cater to the wealthy and powerful. Naomi moved through it with practiced ease, greeting passengers as they settled into their oversized seats, their expressions ranging from indifferent to mildly pleasant. As she reached the final row, a man in a sharp navy suit barely glanced at her before holding out his empty champagne flute. Naomi took the glass and forced a polite smile. Of course, sir. I'll have that refilled right away. She had barely taken a step when he called after her. Oh, wait. He gestured vaguely toward the other side of the cabin, where Charlotte was chatting with a couple near the window. Can she take care of it instead? Naomi froze for half a second. She turned back, keeping her expression neutral. I'd be happy to help you, sir. The man waved a dismissive hand. No offense, sweetheart. I just like how she handles things. Naomi gritted her teeth but nodded anyway. I'll let her know. She walked away, her pulse quickening. This wasn't new. It wasn't even surprising. But today, after everything, it was the final crack in the dam. She caught Riley's gaze across the cabin, and Riley immediately looked away. Naomi set the champagne flute down on the service tray a little too hard. Enough. By the time they landed in Los Angeles, Naomi's mind was already spinning with questions. She had spent the entire flight going through the motions, smiling when necessary, responding in the precise, polished tone expected of her. But beneath the surface, she was seething. She needed answers, and she was going to get them. As the passengers disembarked, she watched Charlotte soaking up the compliments from a well-dressed couple. You have such a wonderful presence, the woman gushed. Some people just have that natural grace. Charlotte laughed modestly. Oh, thank you. I just love what I do. Naomi's grip tightened around the service cart. As soon as the last passenger stepped off, she made her way toward the front of the plane, where Dennis Holloway was already checking his tablet. Can we talk? She asked, her voice controlled but firm. Holloway didn't even look up. Not now, Naomi. We just landed. I'd like an explanation, she pressed, about the lead flight attendant position. Now he looked at her, his expression unreadable. This isn't the time or place for that conversation. Naomi held her ground. Then when? Because I've been waiting for years, and I think I deserve to know why my name was never even on the list. Riley shifted uncomfortably nearby, but Charlotte, who had been pretending not to listen, let out a soft chuckle. Oh, Naomi, she said, shaking her head. You take things way too personally. Naomi turned toward her sharply. Excuse me. Charlotte gave her a pitying look, as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. You know as well as I do that it's not just about experience, it's about what fits the company's vision. Naomi's breath caught. She knew what Charlotte was saying. They all did. But hearing her say it so plainly, so unapologetically, made Naomi's stomach turn. I think we're done here, Holloway said smoothly. Let's not make this into something it's not. Naomi wanted to argue. She wanted to yell, to demand a real answer. But she knew this game. She had just been told in the most careful, calculated way possible that she would never be considered, no matter what she did. And for the first time, she wasn't going to let it slide. Later that night, long after she had checked into her hotel, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? A woman's voice came through the line, low and cautious. You don't know me, she said, but I know what you're going through. Naomi sat up straighter. Who is this? The woman paused. My name is Eva Simmons. I used to work for Stratosphere Airlines. Naomi's grip on the phone tightened. I was in your exact position, Eva continued, and I have something you need to see. Naomi sat at the edge of the hotel bed, her phone pressed tightly against her ear. Why are you calling me? She asked, her voice low but steady. Eva Simmons exhaled on the other end. Because I know exactly what they're doing to you. And if you're not careful, they'll bury you before you even realize it. Naomi's pulse quickened. What are you talking about? There was a pause, then Eva's voice dropped even lower. I used to work for Stratosphere. 10 years, just like you. I followed every rule, played the game, and when I finally applied for a lead position, when I started asking the wrong questions, I was gone within a month. Naomi's fingers tightened around the phone. They fired you? Eva let out a humorless laugh. They didn't have to. They made my life miserable, cut my hours, reassigned me to terrible routes, spread rumors that I was difficult to work with. Eventually, I had no choice but to leave. Naomi swallowed, suddenly feeling the walls of the hotel room close in on her. I don't know you, she said carefully, so why should I believe you? Eva's voice was sharp. Because I have proof, and if you don't want to be next, you need to see it. Naomi hesitated, her heart pounding in her ears. "Meet me tomorrow," Eva said. 9 a.m. Midway Cafe downtown. Then the line went dead. Naomi sat motionless for a long time, the phone still clutched in her hand. She had a choice to make, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was ready for the answer. The next morning, Naomi stepped into Midway Cafe, a small, old-fashioned diner tucked between office buildings in downtown Los Angeles. The scent of fresh coffee and buttered toast filled the air, but Naomi barely noticed. She spotted Eva immediately, an older woman in her late 40s, her dark curls streaked with gray, a pair of sunglasses resting on top of her head. She was seated in a booth at the back, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Naomi slid into the seat across from her. Eva studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "You look like you're still trying to convince yourself you're imagining things." Naomi folded her arms. "I don't know what I believe yet." Eva reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. She slid it across the table. "Take a look." Naomi hesitated before opening it. Inside were copies of internal emails, flight records, and disciplinary reports, all with a clear pattern. Naomi's eyes scanned the pages, her stomach twisting. The documents detailed how certain employees who didn't fit the brand image, were consistently overlooked for promotions. Some names she didn't recognize. Others sent a chill down her spine. "I wasn't the first," Eva said quietly, "and neither are you." Naomi turned the page and froze. There it was, a list of rejected candidates for lead flight attendant. And just like the email she had seen yesterday, her name wasn't on it, because it had never even been considered. Naomi left the cafe with her mind spinning. The folder felt heavy in her hands, as if the truth inside carried a physical weight. She needed time to process, to think, but the system wasn't going to give her that luxury. By the time she reached the hotel, a new email was waiting in her inbox. From Dennis Holloway, subject, urgent meeting, 10 a.m. Naomi stared at it, her heart thudding. They knew. Of course they knew. She forced herself to take a deep breath. She had two choices: pretend nothing was happening and hope they didn't come after her, or face them head on. She chose the latter. The conference room at Stratosphere's Los Angeles office was sleek and sterile, its floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city skyline. Dennis Holloway sat at the end of the long glass table, his fingers steepled. Charlotte Kensington sat beside him, her expression cool, detached. Naomi took a seat across from them. Holloway wasted no time. "I'll get straight to the point, Naomi." He slid a document toward her. "We've received reports that you've been accessing restricted company files. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Naomi didn't flinch. "I wasn't aware that looking at an internal list of applicants was considered restricted." Charlotte let out a small chuckle. "Oh, Naomi, you've always been so passionate." Naomi's jaw tightened. Holloway leaned forward. "Here's the situation. We value our employees, but we can't have anyone disrupting the work environment. So I'm offering you an opportunity." Naomi's stomach twisted. "An opportunity?" He nodded. "Walk away from this. Stop asking questions. Focus on your job, and this all goes away." Naomi exhaled slowly, meeting his gaze. "And if I don't?" His expression darkened. "Then I can't guarantee what happens next." Charlotte tilted her head. "We wouldn't want this to turn into a disciplinary issue, would we?" Naomi felt the threat beneath the words, but something inside her had shifted. She had spent years playing by their rules, waiting for a fair chance that was never going to come. Now she saw the game for what it really was, and she was done playing. She pushed her chair back and stood. "Thanks for the opportunity," she said, her voice calm, "but I'm not interested." Holloway's jaw tensed. Charlotte's smirk faltered. Naomi turned and walked out. She didn't know what was coming next, but for the first time she wasn't afraid to find out. Naomi's footsteps echoed in the long corridor as she left the conference room, her pulse hammering in her ears. The tension in the air had been suffocating, but she hadn't flinched. Not in front of them. She stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the cool Los Angeles air. The city buzzed around her, cars honking, distant conversations, the hum of life moving forward. But Naomi felt like she was standing still. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Be careful, they won't let this go." She stared at the message, her grip tightening around the device. Ava had warned her. If she kept digging, they would come after her in ways she couldn't predict. But there was no turning back now. Back at her hotel, Naomi spread Eva's documents across the small desk, scanning them under the dim glow of the bedside lamp. The more she read, the more the pattern became painfully clear. The same vague performance complaints, the same reassigned flight schedules, the same eventual resignation letters, all sounding eerily similar. They didn't fire people outright. They pushed them out. She pulled out her laptop, opening a blank email. She hesitated for only a second before typing, "To Daniel Lawson." Subject, information on Stratosphere Airlines. She had never spoken to Daniel before, but she knew his work. Investigative journalist, exposed unethical hiring practices at two major corporations. If anyone could help, it was him. She hit send. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time there was no text, just a screenshot, a photo of her, taken earlier that day as she walked into the Stratosphere office. Her blood ran cold. Someone was watching her. The next morning, Naomi walked into the crew lounge, her back straight, her expression unreadable. She knew she had to act normal. She couldn't let them see that she was rattled. As she approached the lockers, she noticed Charlotte Kensington already there, casually applying lipstick in the mirror. Charlotte met Naomi's reflection with a knowing smile. "You've been busy," she murmured. Naomi didn't react. "I don't know what you're talking about." Charlotte capped her lipstick, turning fully to face her. "Oh, come on, Naomi. We both know you're not as subtle as you think." Naomi folded her arms. "If you're trying to scare me, it's not going to work." Charlotte chuckled, shaking her head. "Scare you? No, Naomi. I'm trying to help you." Naomi narrowed her eyes. "You think you're on to something," Charlotte continued. "You think you can change the system by playing detective, but you don't realize what you're up against." Naomi's jaw clenched. "And what exactly am I up against?" Charlotte took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You think Holloway is the problem? He's just the face of it. This goes higher than him. It's been this way long before you got here, and it'll be this way long after you're gone." Naomi refused to look away. "Unless someone does something about it." Charlotte sighed, shaking her head like Naomi was a child who didn't understand the rules of the world. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You have a good job, a good reputation, for now. But if you keep pushing, you won't have anything left." Naomi exhaled slowly. She could feel the weight of the threat in Charlotte's words, but she had already decided. "Then I guess I don't have anything to lose." Charlotte's smirk faltered for just a second. Naomi turned and walked away. She didn't need Charlotte's approval. She needed the truth. Naomi didn't waste time. As soon as she left the crew lounge, she made her way to a quiet corner of the airport terminal and checked her email. Daniel Lawson had responded. "I'm interested. Meet me tomorrow. 8 a.m. Corner booth, Sunrise Diner, near LAX. A wave of relief washed over her. She had taken the first real step. But she knew Stratosphere Airlines wouldn't sit still. By the time she boarded her flight back to Chicago, she could already sense the shift. She was assigned to a different section of the aircraft than usual, economy instead of first class. It wasn't a coincidence. Throughout the flight, she noticed supervisors watching her more closely than before, noting down things she did, even the smallest interactions. They were building a case. She had seen it happen to others. The slow suffocation of someone's career through manufactured complaints and policy infractions that weren't infractions at all. And now it was happening to her. She needed to move faster. The next morning, Naomi walked into Sunrise Diner, the neon lights still flickering from the night before. The place smelled of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon. She spotted Daniel Lawson immediately, a tall man in his 40s, his laptop open in front of him, a notepad beside it. "You Naomi?" he asked as she slid into the booth. She nodded. "You're the journalist." Daniel gave a small smile. "Depends on who you ask." Naomi wasted no time. She slid the folder of evidence across the table. "This is what I have." Daniel flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. "This is substantial." "Will you run it?" she asked. He glanced up. "It's not that simple." Naomi's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Daniel sighed, leaning back. These companies are built to protect themselves. If I publish this and they retaliate, do you have a backup plan? Naomi hesitated. She had been so focused on exposing them that she hadn't fully considered what would happen next. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. Incoming call. Dennis Holloway. She stared at the screen, pulse quickening. Daniel noticed. Let me guess. They know you're here. Naomi clenched her jaw. Let them. She silenced the call. Daniel tapped the folder. All right, Naomi. Let's make them regret this. Naomi walked out of Sunrise Diner feeling the weight of her decision settle in. There was no undoing this. No rewinding. She had put the first domino in motion, and now she had to see it through. Her phone buzzed again. Another call from Dennis Holloway. She ignored it. By the time she reached her hotel room, her inbox was flooded. One email from HR. Subject. Urgent. Employment review meeting. Scheduled. One email from an unknown sender. Subject. You should stop while you still can. One from Riley Vaughn. Subject. Call me. Now. She sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing her temples. They were moving fast. Her doorbell rang. Naomi's breath caught. She wasn't expecting anyone. She hesitated, then cautiously peered through the peephole. It was Riley. Naomi unlocked the door. You couldn't just call? Riley stepped inside, shutting the door behind her. You don't get it. Holloway knows and he's pissed. Naomi crossed her arms. Yeah, I figured that much. No, Naomi. Riley lowered her voice. They're setting you up. I overheard Charlotte talking to one of the supervisors. They're planning to accuse you of misconduct, something serious enough to justify firing you immediately. Naomi's stomach twisted. What kind of misconduct? Riley shook her head. They didn't say. But I know how this works. They'll make something up if they have to. Naomi sat down, pressing her fingers against her temples. This wasn't just about keeping her from speaking out. They wanted to ruin her. The next morning, Naomi walked into Stratosphere Airlines' Chicago office. She wasn't scheduled to fly that day, but she had received the mandatory meeting notice, an excuse to pull her into an ambush. She entered the conference room to find Dennis Holloway, two HR representatives in Charlotte, Kensington already seated. Holloway motioned to the empty chair. Take a seat. Naomi sat, her back straight. What's this about? One of the HR reps folded her hands. Naomi, we've received a number of complaints regarding your behavior. Your interactions with passengers have been flagged as unprofessional, and your recent conduct has raised concerns. Naomi forced herself to stay calm. I'd like to see these complaints. Holloway exhaled slowly, as if she was exhausting him. That's not how this works. Charlotte, sitting smugly beside him, smirked. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Naomi held her gaze. I bet you'd love for me to just walk away, wouldn't you? Charlotte's smile didn't waver. I think it would be best for everyone. Holloway cleared his throat. Naomi, here's what's going to happen. You're being placed on immediate suspension. You will turn in your badge and access credentials today. Naomi's hands curled into fists beneath the table. And if I refuse? Holloway leaned back, watching her carefully. Then I'm afraid we'll have to take this further. Legal action. A formal termination on your record. You'll never work for another airline again. Naomi took a slow breath. They weren't even pretending anymore. This wasn't about performance. It was about control. She looked at Charlotte. Did they promise you something for this? Charlotte's expression darkened for just a second. I don't need promises, Naomi. I play by the rules. Naomi stood. Number, you just make sure the rules never change. She grabbed her bag and turned to the HR reps. Send everything to my attorney. Then she walked out, leaving them speechless. As she stepped into the hallway, her phone buzzed. Daniel Lawson. We're publishing tomorrow. Are you ready for what comes next? Naomi exhaled. She wasn't sure, but it didn't matter. It was too late to stop now. Naomi sat in her car outside her apartment, gripping the steering wheel. She had driven home in silence, every turn of the engine humming against the tension in her chest. Tomorrow the world would know the truth. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel Lawson. Final edits are done. The article goes live at 7 a.m. Brace yourself. She exhaled. There was no undoing this, no last-minute hesitation. A part of her wanted to feel relief, But another part, the part that knew exactly how companies like Stratosphere Airlines operated, was preparing for the worst. She had spent 7 years keeping her head down, following the rules, believing that hard work would eventually earn her a fair shot. Now she was burning it all down. She walked into her apartment, locking the door behind her. The weight of exhaustion pressed against her bones, but she knew sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. She sat at the small kitchen table, pulling out her laptop. If Stratosphere was going to retaliate, she needed to be ready. She opened a folder labeled Evidence. The screenshots, the emails, the testimonies. She backed them up, twice, onto encrypted drives. Then she wrote a resignation letter. Not because she planned to send it, but because she wanted them to know that she wasn't clinging to this job. She was choosing to leave on her terms. Naomi's phone started buzzing before the sun even rose. She barely had time to grab her coffee before her inbox exploded with notifications. Daniel had published the article. The headline was damning. Stratosphere Airlines accused of systemic discrimination. Flight attendant speaks out. She skimmed through the article, her pulse racing. Daniel hadn't held back. Interviews with former employees who had faced the same rejection. Internal emails that proved bias in promotions. Marcus Hill's leaked HR reports. By 9 a.m., it was trending on social media. By 10 a.m., Stratosphere Airlines had released a generic PR statement. We take all allegations seriously and are conducting an internal review. By noon, Naomi's name was everywhere. Her phone rang. Riley. You're all over the news, Riley breathed. I can't believe you actually did it. Naomi let out a small laugh. Neither can I. Some of the crew are texting me. They're scared, but they're also proud of you. Naomi swallowed. She hadn't done this just for herself. But then came the next call. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? A deep voice. Corporate. Miss Caldwell, this is a courtesy call from Stratosphere Airlines. You are required to attend a disciplinary hearing regarding your recent conduct. Naomi almost laughed. You're calling me after you've been exposed. A beat of silence. Then, we highly advise you to reconsider your actions. There are legal consequences for what you've done. Naomi's grip tightened on the phone. So sue me. She hung up. She had nothing left to lose. Naomi expected backlash. She expected corporate threats, legal posturing, and desperate attempts to silence her. But what she didn't expect was how fast it all unraveled. By the time she walked into her apartment that evening, the story had already taken a life of its own. Multiple former employees had come forward. Stratosphere Airlines could no longer dismiss it as a disgruntled employee's exaggeration. Passengers began questioning the airline's policies. Social media was flooded with stories of flight attendants who had been overlooked, harassed, or pushed out. Stock prices dipped. Investors demanded answers. Stratosphere was in damage control mode, and Naomi could practically feel them scrambling behind closed doors. Her phone rang. This time it was a real number. Dennis Holloway. Naomi smirked before answering. Let me guess. You're calling to offer a resolution. Holloway's voice was tight, controlled. You've made your point, Naomi. Now it's time to talk about where this goes next. Oh? You mean after you tried to bury me? A pause. You're not going to win this fight the way you think. Naomi leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. I don't need to win. I just need people to see what's really happening. Holloway exhaled sharply. If you back off now, we can discuss severance, a settlement. Your reputation stays intact. Naomi laughed. A settlement? After everything? His voice darkened. Do you really think you'll work in this industry again after this? Naomi felt something shift inside her. The fear, the constant fear, was gone. She straightened her spine. I don't need Stratosphere Airlines, but you. You need me to shut up. Silence. Then a quiet, seething response. You have no idea what you've done. Naomi smiled. Oh, I think I do. She hung up. They were losing control, and she wasn't done yet. A week later, Stratosphere Airlines made a public statement. They called it a commitment to fairness in the workplace. Naomi called it bullshit. Holloway resigned quietly. Charlotte Kensington disappeared from the airline's public pages. A review committee was formed. But Naomi knew what it really was, an attempt to appease the public. But it didn't matter, because she had done what they never thought she could. She had exposed them. Riley called her that morning. So, what's next? Naomi looked out the window, the Chicago skyline stretching before her. I got a job offer, she admitted. Not as a flight attendant. Something bigger? Riley paused, then grinned through the phone. You're not done fighting, are you? Naomi smiled. Not even close. She had walked away from the airline, but she wasn't walking away from the fight, because if no one stood up to these systems, they would never change. And Naomi Caldwell? She wasn't afraid anymore. Powerful systems thrive in silence, and for years Naomi played by the rules, until she realized the rules were never meant for her to win. Her story is a reminder that speaking up comes at a cost, but staying silent costs even more. How many others have been pushed out, dismissed, or made to believe they weren't the right fit? And more importantly, how many will stand up next? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories that challenge the system and fight for change, don't forget to subscribe. We've got more coming your way.